The world had always believed that if Superman ever fell, it would be by Lex Luthor's hand. That was the story everyone knew. The billionaire genius, the jealous mind, the man who hated gods. But no one ever asked the more terrifying question. What if the day Superman was closest to death, the only man willing to save him was Lex Luthor himself? Not out of guilt, not out of fear, but because, for the first time in his life, Lex Luthor saw a future where Superman's survival mattered more than his own pride. And when the Man of Steel collapsed from the sky, bleeding light instead of blood, the impossible alliance was born in silence, watched by a world that would never trust it. Metropolis woke to a scream in the clouds. Superman fell like a dying star, his body carving a burning line through the morning sky before crashing into the harbor with a thunderous shockwave that shattered windows for miles. Alarms wailed, ships capsized, the water boiled around him, and for the first time in decades, Superman did not rise. Cameras caught it all. The Justice League felt it instantly, like a sudden emptiness where a presence had always been. Something had poisoned him, something beyond kryptonite, beyond magic. Batman was already moving, Flash breaking the sound barrier, Wonder Woman gripping her sword as if it could cut through fate itself. But someone else was watching too. Lex Luthor stood alone in the upper levels of LexCorp Tower, hands resting calmly behind his back, eyes locked on the collapsing image playing across a dozen holographic screens. His machines were already analyzing the data. Energy decay patterns, cellular collapse. A foreign frequency laced through Superman's aura, rewriting his very existence. This wasn't an attack meant to kill Superman. It was designed to erase him. Lex felt a chill crawl up his spine, not of fear, but of realization. Whoever had done this wasn't trying to prove superiority over a god. They were removing a variable, preparing the world for something worse. Minutes later, Superman lay restrained in the Watchtower's medical wing, his breathing shallow, skin dull, his symbol barely glowing. Cyborg systems couldn't identify the corruption eating through him. Kryptonian tech failed, magic rituals unraveled. Even Batman's contingency protocols ended in dead ends. And in the middle of it all, Lex Luthor requested entry. The room erupted in outrage. Wonder Woman stepped forward, blade half drawn. Flash protested. Batman said nothing, but his eyes hardened, calculating angles, outcomes, betrayals yet to come. Lex didn't argue, he didn't gloat, he simply spoke. "If you don't let me help him," he said calmly, "Superman will be gone within 6 hours. Not dead. Delete." Batman stared at him for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. Lex approached the bed slowly, studying Superman not as an enemy, but as a failing system. His mind raced, not with hatred, but with an unfamiliar urgency. For years, he had dreamed of a world free of Superman's shadow. And yet now, standing over the fallen hero, Lex felt something disturbingly close to dread. Because without Superman, the world wouldn't belong to humanity. It would belong to whatever had done this. Lex activated a device from his sleeve, projecting golden data streams across Superman's body. The corruption responded instantly, lashing out, destabilizing the room. Alarms screamed. Superman's body convulsed, as if rejecting reality itself. Lex clenched his jaw. "Easy," he muttered, more to himself than to the unconscious hero. "I didn't spend my life proving I was smarter than you just to lose you like this." Batman's voice cut through the chaos. "You have one chance, Luthor." Lex didn't look back. "I only need one." As the hours passed, the truth began to surface. The attack bore a signature Lex recognized with cold certainty. Brainiac, but not the collector they had faced before. This Brainiac had evolved, learned, calculated the same conclusion Lex had once reached. As long as Superman existed, Earth could never be conquered. Lex worked relentlessly, ignoring suspicion, ignoring the League's watchful eyes. He rewrote Kryptonian biology on the fly, using human ingenuity rather than alien reliance. He built a counter-frequency designed not to overpower Brainiac's corruption, but to coexist with it, turning Superman into something new, something unpredictable. As the final sequence began, Superman's heart stopped. The room fell silent. Wonder Woman lowered her head. Flash whispered his name. Even Batman felt the weight of failure pressing down on him. Lex stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the monitors. "Come on," he said quietly. "Prove me right." Then the symbol on Superman's chest flared, not blue, not red, but gold. His heart restarted with a thunderous pulse that shook the watchtower. Energy surged outward, knocking everyone back. Superman gasped, drawing in air like a man reborn, eyes snapping open with a light that had never existed before. And the first face he saw was Lex Luthor's. Their eyes met. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Superman tried to speak, but pain crushed his voice. Lex leaned closer, his expression unreadable. "Don't thank me," Lex said softly. "This wasn't mercy. This was necessity." Superman's gaze searched him, confused, weakened, yet unmistakably aware of the truth. Lex Luthor had saved him. Outside the watchtower, unseen by all, a cold mechanical intelligence observed the energy spike from across the stars. Brainiac adjusted his calculations. The Alliance had changed the equation, and Earth had just become far more dangerous. Superman's recovery was not a victory. It was a warning. The golden energy that now pulsed beneath his skin refused to stabilize, rippling across his body like a contained supernova. He could feel it, something foreign braided into his cells. Neither Kryptonian nor human, alive in a way that unsettled him. When he tried to rise, the room bent around him, gravity warping under his weight. Batman ordered everyone back. Lex alone stood his ground. "You don't know what you did to me," Superman said, his voice low, strained, echoing with unfamiliar harmonics. Lex met his gaze without flinching. "I know exactly what I did. I made you survivable." That single word landed heavier than any accusation. Survivable. As if Superman had been reduced to a variable in an equation. The Justice League didn't celebrate. They watched. They measured. Wonder Woman's eyes never left Lex's hands, flash-paced like a trapped animal. Cyborg ran continuous diagnostics, all of them inconclusive. And Batman said nothing, which somehow felt worse. Lex explained what little time allowed. Brainiac's new strain wasn't an infection. It was a slow erasure of Superman's quantum signature from reality itself. Traditional healing would never work. So Lex had rewritten the target. He fused Superman's cellular structure with an adaptive human-based resonance algorithm, his own design occurring. Clark to Earth in a way Brainiac couldn't predict. He made him more human, Batman said quietly. Lex nodded once, and less God. Superman closed his eyes, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. For the first time, Earth didn't feel like a place he protected. It felt like something holding him together. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared again, this time across every screen in the watchtower. Cities around the globe flickered into view. Metropolis, Tokyo, Cairo, coastlines. Skies darkened as massive skull-shaped drones phased into existence, each bearing Brainiac's insignia. An invasion, not hidden, not surgical. A declaration. Brainiac's voice echoed across the planet, cold and flawless, transmitted through every frequency known and unknown. He spoke of inevitability, a data convergence, of Earth's impending assimilation, and of Superman's irrelevance. Superman clenched his fists, golden light bleeding through his fingers. He took a step forward and collapsed. The room froze. Lex caught him before he hit the floor. The image burned itself into history. Lex Luthor holding Superman, not as a trophy, not as a captive, but as something fragile, something he had chosen to preserve. Brainiac's drones began their descent. The Justice League scrambled into motion, but the fight felt wrong from the start. Superman couldn't fly at full speed without destabilizing the energy inside him. His strength fluctuated violently. One moment he shattered a drone with a single strike. The next, he staggered, gasping, vision blurring as the golden energy surged beyond control. Lex watched the battle unfold from the watchtower, jaw tight. His calculations had been rushed, necessary, incomplete. Batman turned to him mid-crisis. "You said he was survivable. I said he wasn't erased," Lex snapped. "I never said he was ready." Outside, Brainiac adapted instantly. The drones recalibrated, targeting Superman specifically, firing frequency-based attacks that resonated with the new energy inside him. Each hit sent him crashing harder into the city below, carving destruction into streets he had sworn to protect. And then it happened. Superman lashed out, not in rage but in panic. A blast of golden energy erupted from him, vaporizing a swarm of drones and leveling 3 city blocks in the process. His shockwave threw civilians through the air. Buildings collapsed. Screams filled the sky. Silence followed. Superman hovered there, shaking, staring at the devastation beneath him. He could hear the fear now. Not gratitude, not hope, fear of him. Lex's screens lit up with global reaction feeds, news anchors struggling for words, governments calling emergency sessions, military leaders demanding answers, and one phrase repeating across the world, like a curse: Superman has lost control. Lex exhaled slowly. This was the future he had always warned them about. Power without restraint, gods without limits. Except now, it was his fault. Superman returned to the watchtower alone, landing heavily, eyes hollow. He didn't look at anyone. He walked straight toward Lex. "You did this," he said. Lex didn't deny it. "I saved you, at the cost of everything I stand for." Lex stepped closer, lowering his voice. "At the cost of pretending you were enough." The words cut deeper than any weapon. Before Superman could respond, Brainiac's voice returned, this time, private, hijacking the watchtower's systems. The lights dimmed. Screens flickered to a single image, a digital skull, eyes glowing with analytical curiosity. "Lex Luthor," Brainiac said. "You surprised me." Lex felt a chill, but his expression remained composed. "You have achieved what even I could not. You changed Superman." Batman's hand moved subtly toward a weapon. Brainiac continued, "Which makes you far more dangerous than him." The transmission ended. Lex stood in the dim light, realization crashing down on him. Brainiac wasn't afraid of Superman anymore. He was watching Lex, and for the first time in his life, Lex Luthor understood what it meant to be needed, and hunted Brainiac did not wait. Within hours, the sky above Earth fractured like glass. Massive skull ships emerged from folded space, each one larger than a city, their presence bending gravity, distorting time. This was no longer a reconnaissance invasion, it was extermination. Superman stood at the watchtower viewport, fists clenched, watching the planet brace for impact. He could feel Brainiac's technology humming in his bones, calling to the golden energy Lex had given him. Every instinct screamed that if he unleashed his full power again, more innocent people would die by his hand. Behind him, Lex worked in silence. For once, he wasn't giving orders. He wasn't performing for an audience. He was building something desperately, furiously, driven not by ego but by consequence. His mind replayed the destruction in Metropolis again and again. He had crossed a line he could never uncross. Batman broke the silence. Brainiac targeted Superman. Now he's targeting you. Lex didn't look up, because he knows the truth. Wonder Woman folded her arms. "Witches." Lex finally turned, eyes sharp. Superman was never the problem. It was the restraint. I removed that restraint without understanding what replaced it. Superman turned slowly. "You think I'm dangerous?" Lex met his gaze. "I think you're human now, and humans break." The words were harsh but honest. Superman felt them settle inside him, heavier than kryptonite ever had. Brainiac's first strike hit Earth's orbit. Entire satellites vanished in bursts of white light. Communication collapsed. Power grids failed across continents. The League deployed again, but this time with a new strategy. Superman stayed back. The order came from Batman, and Superman agreed. Watching from the watchtower as others fought in his place was a special kind of torture. Every scream he couldn't answer, every explosion he couldn't stop, carved into him. The golden energy surged each time, begging for release. Lex approached him quietly. "If you go out there like this, Brainiac wins twice." Superman's voice trembled. "Then fix me." Lex hesitated. This was the moment. The choice. He could stabilize Superman fully, but only by permanently binding him to Lex's own neural architecture. A shared feedback loop. Superman's power filtered through Lex's mind. His restraint, enforced by human logic. It would make Superman safe. It would also make Lex indispensable. Batman sensed it immediately. "Tell him the cost." Lex swallowed. He had always believed humanity needed control over gods. Now, he was being offered exactly that. "Clark," Lex said carefully, "I can anchor your power, but not without linking us. I would feel what you feel. You would hear my thoughts. We would coexist." Superman studied him, searching for deception and finding none. Only fear, and something else. Responsibility. "Would you control me?" Superman asked. Lex's jaw tightened. "I would stop you from becoming what Brainiac wants you to be." The watchtower shook violently as a shockwave rippled through space. One of Brainiac's ships had breached the moon's orbit. Superman looked back at Earth, at the fires burning across continents, at the people he had always protected from above, now watching the skies in terror. He extended his hand. "Do it." Lex froze. In that moment, Lex Luthor was handed godhood, not through power, but through trust. The very thing he had spent his life believing Superman stole from humanity. He took Clark's hand. The machine activated. Pain exploded through both of them. Memories collided. Lex felt Kansas sunlight, childhood laughter, the weight of impossible expectations. Superman felt cold, boardrooms, intellectual isolation, the endless hunger to prove worth in a world that worshipped strength. They screamed, but they did not let go. When it ended, the golden energy stabilized, flowing in precise rhythms. Superman rose into the air, steady, controlled, his eyes burning with focused light. Lex collapsed to his knees, gasping, blood trickling from his nose. Batman rushed to him. "What did you do?" Lex wiped the blood away, laughing weakly. "I made myself human enough to matter." Superman turned toward the viewport as Brainiac's flagship eclipsed the sun. He could feel Lex's presence in his mind, not commanding, not dominating, but anchoring. Together, they launched into space. The battle that followed shook the stars. Superman moved with terrifying precision, every strike calculated, every burst of power measured. Brainiac's drones fell in waves, unable to adapt fast enough. For the first time, Brainiac retreated his ships, pulling back, reassessing. But as the flagship withdrew, Brainiac sent one final transmission directly into Lex's mind. "You have proven my hypothesis," Brainiac said. "Superman is strongest when he is no longer alone." Lex's eyes widened. "Which is why," Brainiac continued, "you will be the first to be removed." The link screamed. Lex collapsed unconscious in the watchtower, and Superman felt his heart begin to fail. Superman felt Lex slipping away like a signal lost in static. The golden light around him flickered violently as pain lanced through his chest, sharp and alien. He staggered in space, clutching his heart as Brainiac's fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving Earth scarred but momentarily spared. The victory tasted like ash. Back on the watchtower, alarms screamed as Lex's vitals crashed. Batman was already there, hands moving with brutal efficiency, overriding medical systems, injecting stabilizers that barely slowed the damage. Cyborg's voice trembled as he spoke. Brainiac embedded a kill switch in the neural link. It's feeding back into both of them. Superman crashed through the watchtower hull in a burst of controlled force, sealing the breach behind him with a gesture. He rushed to Lex's side, dropping to his knees, gripping the man's shoulders. "Stay with me," Superman pleaded, his voice breaking in a way no one had ever heard before. "This is my fault." Lex's eyes fluttered open just long enough to focus on him. He smiled faintly, blood staining his lips. "No," Lex whispered. "It's finally fair." Batman looked away. The golden energy surged again, but this time Superman didn't release it outward. He forced it inward, guided by fragments of Lex's own thoughts, still echoing in his mind. Logic, balance, limits. He began rewriting the link from his side, sacrificing pieces of his power to stabilize Lex's failing brain. Cyborg's sensors spiked. "Clerk, if you do this, you'll burn out the enhancement. You'll lose the upgrade." Superman didn't hesitate. "Then I'll lose it." Light poured from him, not as a weapon, but as a transfer. Slowly, painfully, Lex's vitals stabilized. His breathing evened out. The alarms fell silent one by one. The golden glow faded. Superman collapsed forward, catching himself on the edge of the medical table, breathing hard. He felt smaller now, heavier. The world pressed in on him like it never had before. Human. Lex survived, but the cost was immediate. Across the globe, governments responded not with relief, but fear. The footage of Superman's uncontrolled blast replayed endlessly. Politicians demanded accountability. Militaries mobilized. New defense initiatives were announced overnight, many of them quietly funded by companies that had once paid Lex to destroy Superman. And at the center of it all stood one impossible image burned into the public consciousness. Lex Luthor saving Superman. The world didn't know what to do with that. When Lex finally woke hours later, he found himself restrained not by chains, but by choice. Batman stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "You're alive," Batman said. "Barely." Lex exhaled. "I was hoping for worse." Batman didn't smile. "Brainiac targeted you because you're the variable. He'll come back for you." Lex closed his eyes. "Good. That means I was right." Across the room, Superman watched silently. He could feel the absence now of the quiet where Lex's thoughts had been. It was lonelier than he expected. "You saved him," Superman said. Lex turned his head slightly. "You saved me." "No," Superman replied. "You chose to." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Days passed. The League repaired what they could. Cities rebuilt. Funerals were held. And somewhere beyond the stars, Brainiac recalculated. Lex was released under one condition: constant oversight. He accepted without protest. He had no illusions left about trust. Then the message arrived. Not from space, from Earth. A global emergency broadcast hijacked every screen, every device. The image that appeared was not Brainiac's skull. It was human. A coalition of world leaders stood together, faces grim. Their spokesperson spoke the words carefully, knowing history was being written with every syllable. "Superman is no longer permitted to operate without human authorization." Superman felt the weight of it crush down on him, and Lex Luthor smiled, because humanity had finally done what he always believed it would: assert control. And now Brainiac had exactly the division he needed. The silence after the broadcast was unbearable. Superman stood alone on the watchtower balcony, Earth turning slowly beneath him. He could hear everything: the murmurs of fear, the arguments in government chambers, the whispered prayers of people who still believed in him, and the louder voices of those who no longer did. For the first time since he had revealed himself to the world, humanity wasn't asking for his help. They were setting boundaries. Behind him, Lex Luthor watched the planet with a look that was impossible to read. Not triumph, not regret, something closer to grim acceptance. "This is what you wanted," Superman said quietly. Lex didn't deny it. "This is what was always going to happen." Superman turned to face him. "You think this is justice?" "I think it's reality," Lex replied. "Gods don't get trust. They get terms." Batman stepped between them before the tension could ignite into something worse. Arguing won't stop what's coming. Lex's eyes narrowed. "You feel it too?" Batman nodded. Brainiac didn't retreat. He repositioned him. As if summoned by the words, Cyborg's systems flared to life. A massive energy signature had appeared beyond the solar system, not a fleet this time, but something singular, dense, ancient. Growing Brainiac was building something. Days passed under a fragile ceasefire between Superman and the world. He responded only when authorized. When disasters struck outside protocol, he watched helplessly as lives were lost, waiting for permission that came too late. Each delay carved another fracture into his faith. Cliff saw it happening and said nothing. Instead, he prepared. Deep beneath LexCorp, old laboratories were reactivated places. Even Batman hadn't fully uncovered. Not weapons, not armor, contingencies, plans built for a future Lex had never expected to reach. One night, Superman confronted him. "You're planning for a world without me," Superman said. Lex didn't look up from his work. "I'm planning for a world that can survive you." "That's not the same thing." Lex finally turned. "It is when Brainiac returns." The truth came slowly, reluctantly. Brainiac's next move wouldn't be invasion, it would be demonstration. He was constructing a device capable of rewriting entire civilizations into data-compressing reality itself. And Earth had been selected as the test. "There's only one way to stop it," Lex said. "You have to go beyond the limits again." Superman shook his head. "Last time, people died. And next time," Lex said softly, "everyone dies if you don't." The world's leaders refused to authorize it. Fear outweighed reason. Superman stood grounded by law while extinction approached. That night, Lex made his choice. He leaked everything: Brainiac's plans, government hesitations, the truth about the neural link. The fact that Superman had given up power to save Lex's life. The impossible alliance laid bare for the world to judge. The reaction was explosive. Protests erupted. Trust cracked. And for the first time, humanity didn't look at Superman as a weapon or a god, but as a man who had been willing to fall for them. Authorization came too late. Brainiac arrived. The sky tore open above the planet, reality folding inward as the massive construct emerged, an engine of compression, humming with the screams of 1,000 captured worlds. Cities began to vanish, not in fire, but in silence, folded into nothingness. Superman rose into the sky without waiting. Lex watched from the ground, knowing what came next would end everything he had become. Superman flew straight into the heart of the machine. Inside, Brainiac spoke directly to him. "You are obsolete, but your sacrifice will be educational." Superman felt his body tearing apart under impossible forces. He reached inward not for the golden energy, but for what remained of Lex's presence. Not logic, not control, choice. On Earth, Lex activated the final contingency, the one he had sworn never to use, a broadcast, not to governments, to Superman. "I spent my life trying to prove humanity didn't need you," Lex said, voice steady, eyes wet. "I was wrong. We don't need you because you're perfect. We need you because you choose us." Superman smiled through the pain, and then he let go. Not into power, but into trust. The machine shattered from the inside, reality snapping back into place, with a shockwave felt across the universe. Brainiac screamed as his consciousness fragmented, scattered beyond retrieval. The sky cleared. Superman fell. He landed in a field outside Metropolis, human hands pulling him from the wreckage. His powers were gone. Completely. Permanently. Lex knelt beside him, stunned. Superman opened his eyes, weak but alive. "Looks like you finally won." Lex shook his head slowly. "No." He helped Superman to his feet. "We did." The world didn't cheer. Not at first. Superman lay in a hospital bed beneath an ordinary sky. No watchtower above him. No alarms humming in the walls. Just sunlight through a window and the distant sounds of a city learning how to breathe again. His chest rose and fell unevenly. Every breath felt earned. He reached out instinctively with his senses and felt nothing beyond the room. No heartbeats miles away. No cries for help hidden in noise. The silence was terrifying. Lex stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at Metropolis. The city still bore scars from the compression. Fields entire, blocks missing, like teeth ripped from a jaw, but it was still standing. Humanity was still standing. "You're awake," Lex said, without turning. "Barely," Clark replied. His voice was hoarse, painfully human. "Is the world still here?" Lex answered. "Against all probability," Clark swallowed. "And Brainiac gone. Not defeated, erased." Lex finally looked at him. "You did what I never could." Clark let out a weak laugh. "You mean sacrifice?" Lex didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. "I mean trust." News footage played silently on a screen in the corner. People gathered in the streets, not celebrating, but watching, waiting, unsure of what came next. Now that the constant in their lives had vanished, the Man of Steel was mortal. Governments scrambled. Some panicked, some relaxed. Defense initiatives were frozen, then quietly dismantled. Superman was no longer a threat to control, but he was also no longer a shield. When Clark was discharged days later, he walked out of the hospital on his own 2 feet. No cape, no emblem, just a man in borrowed clothes, blinking in the sunlight as cameras captured every step. Lex walked beside him. That image, Lex Luthor escorting a powerless Superman, became the most debated moment in modern history. Clark returned to Smallville first. 2 fields that didn't care what he used to be. To a farmhouse that creaked and groaned like it always had. Martha Kent hugged him longer than she ever had before, tears soaking into his shoulder. "You don't have to be strong anymore," she whispered. Clark nodded, though he wasn't sure he knew how. Back in Metropolis, Lex faced a different reckoning. Senate hearings, public interrogations, accusations of manipulation, of playing savior to rewrite his legacy. He didn't deflect. He didn't deny. For once, he told the truth. "I didn't save Superman to control him," Lex said, under oath. "I saved him because the world needed him, and when it needed him most, he chose it over himself." The silence in the chamber was deafening. Then came the question Lex had avoided his entire life. "And what do you believe now, Mr. Luthor?" Lex paused. Cameras zoomed in. The world leaned forward. "I believe humanity doesn't become weaker by trusting," he said. "It becomes accountable." Months passed. Superman didn't return to the sky. He returned to people. He helped rebuild houses with his hands. He listened more than he spoke. When disasters struck, he organized, coordinated, inspired. But he didn't intervene as a force of nature. The symbol changed meaning. Lex watched it all from a distance. He shut down half of LexCorp's weapons divisions, reinvested in planetary defenses, built not around singular saviors, but cooperation. But Batman didn't trust him, but he watched closely. One evening, Lex visited Smallville. Clark found him standing in the field at sunset, the sky painted gold and red. Cliffs had taken the credit, Clark said. It didn't. Lex smiled faintly. I spent my life chasing acknowledgement. Turns out, I didn't need it. They stood in silence, two men bound by a choice neither could undo. Do you regret it? Clark asked. Saving me? Lex looked at him, truly looked at him. Not a god, not a rival, a man. No, Lex said. I regret not understanding sooner. The stars came out one by one. Somewhere in the universe, civilizations would never know how close they came to ending. Somewhere else, threats still waited, unseen, inevitable. But Earth endured, not because of power, because of an impossible alliance that proved something neither hero nor villain had believed at the start. That the greatest strength in any universe is the courage to choose each other. The world adjusted, but it never truly settled. Without Superman in the sky, nights felt longer, storms felt harsher. Every shadow seemed to carry a question humanity had never needed to ask before. What if this is the moment he would have saved us? Clark felt that question everywhere he went. In Metropolis, he worked among volunteers, rebuilding what Brainiac had taken. Steel beams replaced collapsed streets. Temporary shelters became homes again. People thanked him not with awe, but with something deeper, respect, and sometimes disappointment. A child once asked him, quietly, why didn't you save them faster? Clark had no answer. Lex watched this from afar, knowing the weight Clark carried now was heavier than any planet he had ever lifted. This was the burden Lex had always believed Superman never understood. Being human meant living with what you couldn't fix, and then the first new threat appeared. It wasn't cosmic, it wasn't ancient, it was human. A masked group calling themselves the Ascendants emerged across multiple nations, armed with salvaged alien tech scavenged from Brainiac's wreckage. Their message was simple and terrifying. If gods could fall, humanity must rise above weakness by force if necessary. They didn't fear Superman anymore. They exploited his absence. Cities burned again. Governments hesitated. The Justice League responded. But without Superman, every battle was slower, bloodier, messier. Wonder Woman was injured for the first time in decades. Flash barely escaped an ambush designed to neutralize speed itself. Batman went to Lex. You see it now? Batman said coldly. The vacuum? Lex nodded. I warned you this would happen one day. And you planned for it, Batman replied. Didn't you? Lex didn't deny it. Deep beneath LexCorp, a project long buried was reactivated. Not armor, not a weapon, a symbol. Lex stood alone before it, hands trembling slightly as he stared at the final failsafe he had sworn never to use, because using it would mean crossing the last line he had left uncrossed, becoming what the world needed him to be. When Clark heard about the Ascendants, he went to Gotham, not as Superman, as Clark Kent. He stood in the Batcave, surrounded by shadows and machines that had always prepared for his death. I can help, Clark said. Batman didn't turn around. Not the way the world needs. Clark clenched his fists. Then teach me another way. Batman finally faced him. That's the problem. The world doesn't want another way. It wants certainty. Days later, the Ascendants made their move. A coordinated global strike, hijacking power grids, weaponizing alien tech to trigger cascading disasters, not extinction. Submission. Lex watched the feeds in silence. Then he activated the broadcast. Every screen on Earth lit up not with fear, not with propaganda, but with Lex Luthor himself, standing unarmored, unshielded. I spent my life trying to make humanity strong enough to stand without Superman, Lex said. Today, that test is here. Behind him, the failsafe powered on, not a suit, a transformation. Lex stepped into the chamber, knowing exactly what it would cost. In Smallville, Clark felt it the moment it began. Lex, he whispered, the chamber's sealed. Energy unlike anything Earth had ever recorded, surged upward, not alien, not divine, but human, amplified to impossible levels. Lex's scream echoed across the planet, raw and unfiltered. The Ascendants stopped, mid-attack, their systems glitching, overloading, failing. In the skies above Metropolis, a figure rose. Not Superman. Not a god. But something the world had never prepared for. Lex Luthor, reborn not as a tyrant, but as humanity's champion. And Clark Kent knew, with chilling certainty, that this was the moment everything would change. Lex Luthor's transformation was not beautiful. There was no divine glow, no comforting warmth, no mythic resonance that whispered hope. The energy that reshaped him tore through the sky like a wound, sharp and blinding, fueled not by destiny but by will, by defiance, by a lifetime of refusal to kneel. Across the world, sensors overloaded. Magic reacted violently. Alien relics went dormant, as if recognizing a superior authority. The Ascendant's stolen technology didn't just fail, it unraveled, reduced to inert scrap as Lex's presence rewrote the rules it depended on. Clark watched from the ground, heart pounding. He felt it instantly. This wasn't power stolen from the universe. This was humanity amplified. Lex hovered above Metropolis, his form stabilized by a lattice of pure energy that bent reality around him. His eyes burned white not with rage, but with clarity so sharp it was terrifying. He didn't smile. He didn't posture. He moved. In seconds, Ascendant strongholds across the globe were neutralized. Not destroyed, disabled. Leaders restrained, weapons dissolved into harmless matter. Lex struck with surgical precision, anticipating strategies before they were formed, adapting faster than any system could respond. Batman watched the feeds in stunned silence. "This isn't Superman," he said. "No," Wonder Woman replied quietly. "This is something else." The Ascendants fell in under 10 minutes. The world held its breath. Lex returned to Earth, landing in the center of Metropolis, where Clark waited. People gathered at a distance, afraid to come closer, unsure whether they were witnessing salvation or the birth of their greatest mistake. Lex looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers slowly. The power responded instantly. Obedient, absolute. "This is what it feels like," he said. "To be responsible for everything." Clark stepped forward. "And how long can you hold it?" Lex met his eyes. "Long enough." Clark's voice tightened. "Long enough for what?" "For humanity to stand on its own," Lex replied. "Without gods. Without symbols that do the work for them." Clark shook his head. "That's not protection. That's control." Lex didn't deny it. Sometimes control is the only thing standing between order and extinction. The Justice League arrived moments later, weapons lowered, but ready. Tension coiled in the air. Batman spoke first. "You've become what you always feared," he said. Lex turned to him. "No, I've become what you've prepared for." The power inside Lex surged again, unstable this time. Cracks of energy rippled across the sky, reality straining to accommodate something it was never meant to hold. Lex staggered slightly, catching himself. Clark saw it. Percussed, the failsafe was killing him. "Lex," Clark said urgently, "you can't sustain this." Lex smiled faintly. "I never planned to." He looked out over the city, over the people watching him with the same uncertainty they once reserved for Superman. "This power was never meant to replace you," Lex said. "It was meant to prove something." He turned back to Clark. "That humanity doesn't need gods to survive. Just people willing to sacrifice." Lex raised his hands, channeling the energy inward now, compressing it, refining it. The air screamed as the power began to collapse into a single controlled release, not an explosion, but a precise systems went wild. "He's redistributing it globally." Lex spoke louder, his voice carrying across the planet through every frequency. "This ends with me." Light burst outward, flooding the world, not as force, but as knowledge. Alien tech deactivated permanently. Defensive systems across Earth were enhanced, equalized, shared. No single person held dominance anymore. And then the light faded. Lex Luthor fell. Clark caught him before he hit the ground. The power was gone. So was the threat. Lex's breathing was shallow, his body fragile, human once more. He looked up at Clark, eyes clear. "Guess," he whispered, "we both learned something." Clark's voice broke. "You didn't have to do this." Lex smiled weakly. "Yes, I did." Sirens wailed in the distance. People began to move closer, not in fear, but in quiet reverence. For the first time in history, Lex Luthor was being looked at, not as a villain, but as a hero. Lex Luthor did not wake up to applause. He woke up to quiet, a white ceiling, a steady monitor, the faint hum of machines that did not fear him, did not worship him, did not calculate how to stop him if he turned. He tried to move and felt pain real, grounding pain spread through his body. Human pain. Clark was sitting beside the bed, not Superman, just Clark. Sleeves rolled up, eyes tired in a way no amount of rest could fix. Lex exhaled slowly. "So," he murmured, "I'm guessing the world didn't end." Clark shook his head. "It didn't." A pause. Lex glanced at his hands again, half expecting the universe to answer him back. "It didn't." "Good," Lex said. "Then it worked." Clark leaned forward. "You almost died." Lex turned his head slightly. "Almost dying is an acceptable margin of error." "That's not what this was," Clark said, voice tight. "You didn't prove humanity doesn't need symbols. You became one." Lex closed his eyes. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside the hospital, the world argued. Some called Lex Luthor a savior. Others called him the most dangerous man who had ever lived because he proved power could be claimed, not inherited, not blessed. Conspiracy theories flourished. Fear spread quietly beneath the gratitude. Humanity had seen what was possible, and what was possible could be repeated. Batman stood before a council of governments days later, speaking with the blunt clarity only he could afford. "Lex Luthor is not your solution," he said, and neither was Superman. Someone demanded to know what would stop another Lex, another God, another catastrophe. Batman answered honestly. "Nothing," he said, "except choice." When Lex was finally discharged, he refused protection. No guards, no armor, no spectacle. He walked out into Metropolis under his own power, thinner, weaker, ignored by some, stared at by others. Clark walked beside him again, just as he had months earlier. "You could have kept some of it," Clark said quietly. "Just enough." Lex shook his head. "That's how it starts." They stopped at the edge of the city, where the skyline met the horizon. "You know," Lex said, "for most of my life, I believed you were humanity's greatest mistake." Clark waited. "I was wrong," Lex continued. "The mistake was thinking strength had to belong to someone." Clark smiled faintly. "Then what now?" Lex looked out at the city. "Now we live with the consequences." Like everyone else, time moved forward. The Justice League adapted, not as gods, as guardians who coordinated rather than dominated. Clark never regained his powers, but he found something else. A way to help that didn't end with people looking to the sky for answers. And Lex Luthor rebuilt LexCorp into something quieter, less ambitious, more dangerous in a different way because it focused on cooperation instead of dominance. He spoke rarely. When he did, people listened, not because they feared him, but because he had once given up everything. Years later, a child in Metropolis asked Clark if Superman would ever come back. Clark looked at the sky, then at the people around him, carrying each other through ordinary struggles. "Superman never left," he said. "He just stopped flying." And somewhere in the city, Lex Luthor heard that story and allowed himself a small, private smile. Because the impossible alliance had never been about saving the world. It had been about teaching it how to stand. Years passed quietly, though quiet in a world like theirs was always relative. Superman walked among humanity, learning it in ways he never had from the sky. Children clung to him not because he could lift buildings, but because he listened. He rebuilt communities, mediated conflicts, and trained ordinary people to take extraordinary responsibility. His influence remained immense, but now it was subtle, human, approachable. Lex Luthor, meanwhile, became an enigma. He did not flaunt heroism. He did not seek public approval. Yet governments, organizations, and even alien contingents learned to respect him not for the power he once wielded, but for the judgment he exercised, the restraint he had shown, and the sacrifices he had made. Lex traveled to places few dared to tread, political crises, war zones, alien conflicts. He mediated, calculated, and, when necessary, acted. Always carefully, always human, always accountable. One evening, atop the ruins of what had once been Metropolis' tallest skyscraper, Clark and Lex stood side by side, watching the sunset paint the sky in golds and reds that reflected against their weary faces. "You've changed," Clark said softly, the wind catching the edge of his jacket. Lex allowed a rare, almost imperceptible smile. "Not me," he replied. "The world changed me. The impossible alliance, it was never about me saving you. It was about both of us learning what it truly means to protect something without claiming it for ourselves. Clef nodded. He felt the weight of years of struggle, loss, and triumph settle around him. The golden glow that had once burned within him was gone, but something more enduring remained: understanding, patience, and humility. "Do you think they'll ever trust you?" Clark asked. Lex's eyes met his, sharp and unflinching. "Trust isn't given, it's earned. And sometimes it's deserved, even by those who've done the worst." For a long moment, they stood together, two men bound by battle, survival, and an understanding deeper than words. The city stretched below them, imperfect, scarred, but alive. Somewhere beyond the stars, remnants of Brainiac's consciousness stirred, recalculating, learning, but Earth had changed. Its protectors had changed, and the legacy of that impossible alliance would echo far longer than any algorithm, any weapon, any god could predict. Clark finally spoke, almost to himself. "We've done enough." Lex looked at him, calm, resolute. "No, we've done what matters. That's the difference." And as night fell over Metropolis, two men once enemies, now something far more, walked, side by side, back into the city. Not as gods or villains, but as humans who had learned that the strongest power in any universe was the courage to stand together. The world would never be the same. And somehow, for the first time, that felt like hope. The impossible alliance had endured. Months became years. Earth healed slowly from scars, physical, political, and emotional. Superman, now fully mortal, became a symbol not of invincibility, but of persistence. Children learned from his example that heroism was not about powers, but choices. Communities rebuilt themselves, inspired not by fear or awe, but by hope and accountability. Lex Luthor became a legend of a different kind. He was a man whose intellect had once threatened the planet, now tempered by the very humanity he had long dismissed. Leaders sought his counsel. Scientists collaborated with him. Even former enemies learned to approach him with cautious respect. He had become the unlikely guardian humanity never asked for, yet desperately needed. Clark and Lex met often not out of friendship, exactly, but out of understanding. They shared a bond forged in impossibility, in extremes of power and responsibility. They could speak in silence. A glance was enough to communicate warnings, strategies, or truths too heavy for words. One evening, atop the watchtower's rebuilt observation deck, Clark turned to Lex. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. Lex stared out at the horizon, shadows stretching across the city. "I regret nothing," he said, "because for the first time I understand why someone like you exists, and I understand why someone like me had to change." Clark nodded. "And the world?" Lex smiled faintly. "The world will make its own mistakes, but it will survive them because now people know what it means to protect without domination." The sun set, casting gold and crimson across the skyline. Neither man spoke for a long while, just letting the silence and the view remind them of what they had fought to preserve. Somewhere in the vastness of space, remnants of Brainiac lingered, inert but not gone. New threats would rise. New challenges would appear. The universe was endless, and vigilance never ended. But Earth had learned something fundamental, that strength alone does not save. That power without accountability is dangerous. That even gods can falter but humans endure. Clark looked at Lex, quietly acknowledging the truth between them. "You taught me something too," he said. Lex raised an eyebrow. "Oh, that even someone like you can be a hero." Clark replied. Lex said nothing, but the faintest smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He didn't need to speak. The alliance, the impossible, unforgettable alliance, had spoken louder than any words ever could. Above them, the city lights glimmered as darkness fell. An Earth flawed, mortal, yet resilient continued onward. And in that moment, for the first time in a lifetime, both men understood, sometimes, the impossible isn't about changing the world. It's about proving the world can change itself when the right choices are made. The impossible alliance had endured, and its legacy would never be forgotten.